All right, we might as well get the party started. If you consider chapter 18 the party, that's what the party's going to be today. So let's get on into it. The quicker we get into it, the quicker we'll get done with it, hopefully. So let me go ahead and share that screen. First off, let's see here. Let's share this screen first. Just a reminder. Don't forget you got a paper due April 15th in this class. It's under the content area. So find that it's just thought provoking. It shouldn't be incredibly hard, but it's very relatable to what we're having to deal with right now with this whole COVID deal going on. So I just wanted to get your guys' thoughts. And like I said, that's taking the place of that big event we were going to try to do. So I think that's a lot easier than the alternative for you probably. So we'll stop that share. We'll share the other screen here and go here. So what we're going to talk about today, we've touched on this already. And it's something that you will deal with more often in populations, such as people with autism or developmental disabilities, maybe brain injury, things like that, where you have, those are probably the most common cases of who, if you work with that particular population, these are very useful tools. Some facilities have these, we showed a video one class of, it was called a snoozling room. And it had all the different lights and, sensory things going on. And we'll talk a little bit more about what they do for the patients in this chapter. So what we want to talk about, what this whole deal, we're trying to help our people integrate their senses to be able to understand what they're feeling, because a lot of times that's the problem, and it'll turn into bad behavior or things that you don't understand, and a lot of it may be because they're having trouble processing their senses. Doesn't make sense to us because we can process our senses, but they feel things and they don't know why. So sensory stimulation, some of this is just definition wise, it's good because you should be able to use this for the test on some of the things. It would be some of these definitions that you should be able to find some answers on these slides when y'all have your test, just so you know. So sensory stimulation increases the level of arousal and consciousness through activating the reticular activating system. What that is, that's what's responsible for maintaining consciousness in people, period. It facilitates and calibrates sensory input. So when you think of calibrating, that's kind of getting something set. What other things might we have to calibrate? Something comes to mind for me is like a scale, the kind that you use at the doctor's office. You have to get an actual, sometimes it has to be adjusted, calibrated where it's accurate. So this sensory stimulation helps to calibrate or get things where they need to be. Sensory inputs at therapeutic amounts of frequency, duration, and intensity that typically exceed everyday levels. So a little step above what they're normally going to be exposed to. That's why when you see like that snoozling room that we showed that had all the different sensory, you had soft things, you had squishy things, you had balls with knobs on them, you had things they could turn, they had little, like lava lamp things, bubbles, and all these things that just stimulate the senses. They even incorporate smell in these rooms, different aromatherapy type situations to pull out, these sensory activities for the individuals. So Now, it says here, therapeutic amounts of frequency, duration, and intensity. The amount that someone is going to need is probably going to vary based on the individual. And we've talked about that from the start as far as therapeutic recreation and how it needs to be not cookie cutter plans, that it needs to be individualized. So you'll see that everybody doesn't necessarily need the same amount of time having sensory integration. Some of your patients won't need it at all. Some may need it a lot. So there's a definition here of undifferentiated bombardment. When you think of bombardment, what does that mean? Like if you feel like you're being bombarded, what would that be? What's that? Yeah, interrupted, bothered excessively. Like if every one of you guys started asking me a question right now at the same time, I would be being bombarded with questions. And there's no way that I could handle that. That would send me into an anxious state, which is kind of what a lot of times happens with these individuals. They're dealing with this undifferentiated bombardment where they have an overload of incoming sensory information. Okay, for us that are sitting in this room, most of us at least don't have this going on. But now, some days I'm a little more sensitive to things. Like I keep hearing that elevator today, probably more than I should, but ding, ding, ding. Some of y'all probably haven't even heard it. Someone who has this undifferentiated bombardment, that'd be like, they wouldn't even hear me talking. They would just hear that. They would hear the hum in the room. They can hear that projector up there. If there was a clock somewhere ticking, I could forget it. They'd be watching that clock. That's a sensory thing, and it's very common in a lot of these people to be like mesmerized by clocks. Kind of strange to us. I mean, I am when it gets close to 5 o'clock and it's time for me to go. I become mesmerized by clocks at that time, but otherwise I'm really not. Now, individuals lose ability to process such large amount of information and overload. Once they become overloaded, it becomes dysfunctional. They have a hard time carrying on with their daily routine because they're overtaken by this sensory overload, this undifferentiated bombardment. So just consider bombardment as an overload situation, more than they can handle. So we all know what our senses are, and these are just some examples of things that stimulate the different senses, okay? You've got sight and visual, some things that can stimulate that spectrum or that sense. Bright colors, flashing lights. We've talked a little bit about this. Sometimes we have to watch out for this with our patients. If we have patients who have epilepsy or something like that, flashing lights can actually cause seizures at times. Kind of an interesting note that a lot of people don't know. Hearing and auditory, music, drum beats, we all know things like that will stimulate that sense. Touch and tactile, different textures such as fur, silk, mud. My 2-year-old kid, his books that we have for him right now, it'll have an alligator that has like a little cutout of it, and you can feel the skin of the alligator. And then you turn the page and there's a lion and it's fuzzy and you can feel that. That's because children are much like these, probably older individuals you'll be working with who have sensory issues. They're still learning their senses as a young child. And that's why they're given these things as learning tools to be able to become familiar with these different tactile senses. Taste or gustatory. Some things that can fit there are strong tastes like cinnamon, chocolate, foods from different cultures may fit the bill on this. We've seen the videos of little kids biting into a lemon and the whole, thing that they do. Those are funny. That's a case of them getting a little, a funny sense stimulation, because that's exactly a strong taste. Smell and olfactory, essential oils. Like we talked about, they play these, a lot of times they use these things in these snoozling rooms, these sensory rooms. Sometimes there are just different, when you start pulling in things, if you're going to be using things like essential oils and things like that, a lot of times this plays into calming mechanisms where you're actually being really calm. You're taking the time to try to bring in that smell and maybe identify what it is, things like that. And then something that's a little harder to, some of you may not be familiar with, is this proprioception, which is kinesthetic awareness. It's basically when I close my eyes and I reach my arm out like this, I'm able to sense, and I know that my arm is right here. Some individuals don't really have that awareness of where it doesn't correlate to the brain what their body is doing necessarily. So they need to be exposed to some different movements, some different positions to be able to start recognizing, okay, well, when I feel this means that this is going on. Some ways to stimulate this: balance boards. We've all been on a balance board or one of those balls that you are on and makes you balance. That kind of helps you get some kinesthetic awareness. Rocking chairs, very similar. Okay, I'll go back to individuals on the autism spectrum. When I was at NMRC, the clients that we had that most enjoyed swinging were our clients who were diagnosed with autism. No doubt, across the board, you couldn't hardly get them off of the swing. They loved it. They loved that. They were getting that stimulation that their body craved. Now, another odd thing, then it kind of fits in with this whole stimulation deal that goes along with autism, just something else to understand, is because it's kind of an odd thing to be dealt in life. They have trouble with communication. They have trouble with sensory things. They have trouble with realizing what's safe and what's not. And a child with autism will just climb up like if they had access to climb up a big tall tower, they might do it with like zero fear. They don't have the fear of falling off of it, so that's something that we have to watch and kind of watch out for. But, we've talked about how they don't really like people in their space. They don't like to hug necessarily a lot of times. But in direct contrast to that, they have, in some of these stimulation rooms or calming rooms, they have things that are kind of like a hammock that are used with individuals with autism, and they basically get them into it, and it wraps around them and squeezes, and it's like a deep pressure, and they like that. It's very odd for someone who's been diagnosed with autism not to like that deep pressure feeling. Now, they wouldn't like it as much if it was from you, but with it being from something else, they seem to respond well to that. It's kind of odd to me that they like that, but don't want that physical touch from a human. For the most part. Now, there's exceptions. What else? I also noticed that, when you're in water, you don't realize it, but there's a hydrostatic pressure that's around you. And I can't remember the exact number here, so don't quote me on this, but when you are in the water, if you are submerged, like up to your neck, your like thoracic cavity is smaller by about 30%. when you're in that water because of the hydrostatic pressure. Now that seems insane because you don't feel it squeezing you like that, but you know who feels it? Those individuals who have autism. They can feel that difference. And they love water, unless there's, some are scared of water or new experiences, but the ones who like to get in the pool, they love the pool because they can feel that. And they'll sit there and do some of this sensory stimulation by just splashing, maybe squeezing their hand at the top of the water and making it just squirt through their hand. They'll do that for the whole class if you just let them, Very interesting group to work with. So there's some guidelines for providing sensory stimulation interventions. Now, just like with someone who is sick, you want to start providing intervention as early as possible. They have, there used to be at the NMRC, I can't remember the name of the group, it was basically the early intervention program. And it was for parents to bring their children in who needed early intervention services, who were dealing with autism or things of the like, and they're able to start working with them on sensory issues. OT would work with them on being able to do, normal everyday activities that they were not doing necessarily. So early intervention, and there's been a lot shown about early intervention with autism, in that it makes a big difference in the functionality of the individual when they get older. So early intervention is key. Just like with sickness, if someone has cancer, the earlier that it's diagnosed, the earlier you have treatment, the better your outcome is going to be. Same deal. The greater the cognitive impairment, the greater the need for sensory stimulation. So again, that ties into the fact, like I said, a lot of times we're able to understand our senses and what they mean and why we feel a certain way. If they have a great cognitive impairment, then they're not able to say, okay, this is why I'm feeling this. Or why am I smelling this smell? What is this? It's confusing to them and not something that they can, put into place and realize what's going on. Intensive or multidisciplinary theory produces better outcomes for individuals with brain injuries. So that's basically saying that not just using one type of, sensory integration, just through recreation therapy, the more people that work with them and the more often it happens, the better the outcomes are going to be. That's been shown for people with brain injury who are much, they have the same issues with figuring out what their senses mean when they feel these things. What is, why do I feel this way? It's kind of what they get. Posture affects the level of arousal. When you are, speaking to someone, you can tell whether someone's engaged or not, whether by how they're sitting. If you're talking to somebody, if they're sitting up and they're sitting, forward and they're listening and they're nodding their head and they're with you, then, just tie that into this. When someone is upright to a degree, they're going to be more alert than, are you more alert when you're sitting up or when you're laying flat on your back? General rule. As a general rule, you would think it would be when you're sitting up. Now, sometimes when I try to go to bed at night, I start thinking about the emails that I didn't respond to the day before. And I might become more aroused at that point because it starts to bug me. But as a general rule, position can have an effect on the level of arousal. Surroundings of the sensory stimulation experience should be free of distractions. Now, this goes not just for this, but it's especially important for when you're talking about sensory stimulation. You're wanting them to feel things, you're wanting them to hear things, you're wanting them to smell things, and you're wanting them to be specific as to what you are providing them. You know, if you're putting out aromatherapy that you want them to smell, if you have certain lights that you're wanting them to take in, you need them to just be taking in those things. So it needs to be free of distractions, quiet, comfortable, well lit, and relaxing. If it was 100 degrees in here right now, how many of y'all would be paying attention to me, or how many of y'all would be sitting up there fanning and possibly leaving? Several, I'm sure. And I would understand, and I would probably let you go, because I wouldn't stand up here if it was 100 degrees in this room. So anyway, you get my point. It needs to be, we all know that this, I mean, trying to take a test and they're out there, you know, filling up the Coke machine. Would that bother you? Because it's pretty loud. They've done it a few times during our classes. That's a problem. So you're trying to concentrate. You want somebody to focus on what you put in front of them, then you don't need to have distractions that don't have anything to do with what you're doing. They need to be able to try to get focused in on the task at hand. Some more guidelines here. The setting or format of the sensory stimulation should be selected carefully based on who you're working with, based on what you have available, based on where their sensory needs are. Those sort of things all come into play. Again, like I said, the session length may vary due to the needs of the person. Some people need more sensory stimulation activities than others. Now, documentation. I'm not sure if I've talked enough about documentation in this class, but, Whee, like a squeal?
Sounded like a teapot or something.
It's probably a teapot. See, we're talking about distractions. I set that up before class. I had somebody come and do that, just where I could have a good example for you guys. Yeah, I think it just was impeccable timing. Thank you, whoever did that. Now, again, a lot of times, okay, the steps of therapeutic recreation are what? What's the acronym? APOD. There is something that's added to this a lot of times. What would be the last thing that would be added? Any ideas? There's a hint up here on this. Look at where we are. Documentation, thank you. A lot of people have changed this to APIDE. And what that's saying is you need to go through the whole process and you need to have documentation. And I have not stressed it probably as much as I should. I do think that I've stated that if you do not document what has happened, then it didn't happen. Okay, if it's not down, you didn't do it. You won't get credit for it. It won't be something that can be tracked. So documentation is very, very important. And when you're doing your documentation, it needs to be specific and cover things like whether or not your patients were actively participating. What was their body language? Were they giving you eye contact during these sessions? Were they smiling? Were they not smiling? Postural changes during sessions. Did you see anyone who, you know, was not sitting up, who sat up to start, you know, like you could tell that they were aroused by what was going on? Things like that is, if you see things and document things that showed positive changes or showed that they were actively engaged with what you're doing, then that's going to help you with future effective interventions. Okay, that's where documentation comes in. Also, say you leave your facility, you have this wonderful job opportunity come in. You're going to have somebody come in and take your place. What do they need when they come in? They need your documentation. They need to be able to look and see, okay, and find a narrative for your people and say, this is what they've been doing. This is what works with them. They can sit down, Your documentation provides that. So honestly, in the future, I may go to even adding that D on the API because it's that important. I've left it off to this point because it's kind of, some people have it, some people don't, but it is important enough to probably be part of the deal. Some facilities have a lot of documentation. Some facilities have less documentation. The more therapeutic in nature that the facilities are, the more documentation you probably will have. Some people will be surprised at the amount of documentation that is expected at certain facilities. Some places don't have a ton, but some places have a whole lot of documentation asked. When appropriate, specialists are encouraged to interact with patients during the session. Okay, what would be a situation when you wouldn't want to interact with the patient? When would it not be appropriate? Anything come to mind? Say your patient is, you're in one of these, say, snoozling rooms, and you've got the bubble tube, and you've got a client that I'm talking about is zoned in, and they're smiling, and they're watching it, and they're touching the side of it. Do you want to come in and interrupt that at that moment? No. If they're not actively engaging with something, that's when you want to step in during the session and say, here, try this, you know, touch, feel this right here, try this, here, I want you to smell, you know, that's when you're going to step in when you see that their posture is not engaged, that they're not really getting anything much out of what's being offered. And you know, sometimes the best laid plans don't go as well as you would hope. I mean, you picture a specific client just thriving from something that you're going to offer them, and they may not. And it may take a little extra boost from you to get them excited and to get them to involve. You know, they may not be ready to just jump right in without that boost. And that in itself, again, circling back, tells you why you need that rapport with your patients, where they're going to trust you. And when you say, hey, let's try this, they're going to be like, okay, this is a trusted individual for me, I'll try it. So I'm trying to tie everything together as we're getting toward the end here. Staff using sensory stimulation should consider the individual's past history and preferences and should introduce sensory items systematically. Okay, we talked about that bombardment thing, that overload situation. That's why you want to introduce things systematically. You wouldn't want to just bust a client up into a room with Metallica playing and strobe lights and squirt guns shooting across the room and things flopping, or, you know, like it would just be too much. You're talking about someone who can't a lot of times deal with their senses and the feelings that they give them. So start out slow, give them a couple things, and then as introduce more things as they become familiar and comfortable with what you've given them. Does this make sense so far to you guys? Y'all following on this so far? All right, snoozling. It's that room that we showed the video on. It's got the bubble tubes. It's got a soft couch you can lay on. It's got little light strings that they were playing with. What else did it have? Like I swear I think it had like a climbing wall in it even, the one that was on there. I really think that there was like a wall you could kind of like climb on.
It had a water bed.
Yeah, a water bed. There's, guarantee you they have music available. They have scent available. A lot of different, you know, you're talking about trying to hit as many of these senses as you can as appropriate for the clients that are in there at the time. So what it is, snoozling, remember the name. It's a strange name. You should be able to remember it. Multisensory environment and related products. Like I said, this is something that's actually on the market now. There are companies that sell snoozling rooms, basically. They'll come in and build you a sensory paradise for your people and give you a big old bill for it when they get done most of the time, because it's a very specialized thing that you're asking for. It was originally designed for people with severe and profound developmental disabilities. Like I said, these are the people who, severe and profound, we're talking about patients who need help on almost everything in the continuum. They need help with dressing, bathing. They need help with brushing their teeth. These severe, profound individuals. That's who it was originally designed for. And what it's supposed to be is a safe and non-threatening experience that uses, this word is kind of important, gentle sensory exposures meant to enhance pleasure. And as you expose them to the different things that are available, you'll see which ones they like. They're going to gravitate towards the different sensory items and sensory issues that they like the most. Those are going to be the ones that they're going to go to. Investigations on short-term and long-term effect of snoozling are very promising yet inconclusive. I can tell you they just don't have data necessarily to support it. I have seen it. Y'all saw it in the video. You see positive, at the very least, positive short-term effects from this snoozling environment, okay? So there's some research on sensory stimulation, and what it is for, it helps identify promising practices for clients with a range of intellectual and perceptual difficulties. That's something that we have to realize too, is that it may not necessarily be a case of intellectual issues. Sometimes it's perceptual. We all can, it's like I said in another class, you see two people whispering over there. We perceive, a lot of us, they're over there talking about me. Our perceptions sometimes are not what things are really happening. So we got to remember that. A lot of our individuals may just have more trouble with perceptual difficulties than they do with the intellectual side. Several authors have concluded that there is no large-scale proven efficacy of sensory stimulation. Again, I tend to, as a practitioner who has worked with different sensory modalities with patients, I have seen positive effects. I have seen smiles on their faces when they left as opposed to frowns when they got there. Now, where they don't, they must be looking at like extreme long-term effects or something like that in this data collection, because I promise you there is efficacy in sensory stimulation. At the very least in short term, I promise you. Results may not apply to populations other than those of the original research. So they were looking at people with intellectual and perceptual difficulties, especially starting out with developmental disabilities to start with. Now, another group that can benefit from sensory stimulation are people with dementia. What do you think sensory stimulation could do for these people who suffer from dementia? Yep, bring a memory back. Any of you guys ever have a smell, like you'll just smell something and it's like, man, that reminds me of so-and-so. If I smell a corn dog, I think about the fair. Just saying, something like that. Different smells can take you places. The best example I can come up with are like songs. I can hear a song and think and tie it into a special event in my life, and that, that happened when that song was playing for me. It takes me back. And you'd be surprised how many people who have dementia find a lot of positivity out of some of this stimuli that is given to them. They may not be able to speak. I mean, I think I've talked about this in here even before too, and I think some of you have seen the video of the lady. I think she was 90-something years old, and she used to be a ballerina, and she was just flat. She's showing no emotion. She's not interacting with anybody, and they started playing this song that it was like Swan Lake or something like that she danced to obviously years and years and years ago. And she started like doing her dance like that she did freaking 60 years ago. You know, she doesn't remember the person's name sitting next to her, but that music, through auditory stimulation, that's what it is. I mean, whether you want to just call it music or auditory stimulation, it took her back to that place, and it brought her, I guarantee you, she felt happy while she was doing that. She felt like her old self during that time. Now, is that going to stick with her forever and ever? The rest of, is she going to be thinking about it later that night? Probably not. But did it bring her some joy for the time that she was doing it? Absolutely. So what they've seen as far as research with dementia, engagement duration, attention, and attitude has been significantly higher with work-related stimuli regardless of work-related tasks. So they get better results from people with dementia after some exposure to some of this sensory stimuli. Offering sensory stimulation products during unstructured time improves quality of life. That's kind of what I was getting to about, every time you can put a smile on their face, you're improving quality of life. Use of dolls as tactile stimulus improves activity participation, interaction with staff, increases happiness, and reduces agitation. Have you ever seen that in an elderly individual? That actually I have in like an assisted living facility. Older individual had a baby doll, and don't you try to take her baby doll. That was her baby as far as she was concerned, I'm telling you. And was it worth going through that fight to tell her that's not a real baby? What is that going to do? Nothing at all, except make her probably slap you, honestly, because there's some aggression that comes out with dementia sometimes too. So, it's just like I've said before. Another thing to remember, if you ever work with patients with dementia, if they tell you something is wrong or something that is wrong, that is incorrect, unless it is something that is going to be dangerous for them to think that, is there any need to correct them? If they're in the dementia system where they are not remembering people's names, they're not, if you walk in and they call you, if you walked in and they called you John, you just need to be John. Makes no sense to you, but you telling them your correct name, you know what they're going to call you the next time they call you? John. If they have identified you as John, you're going to be John. So just saying, that's correcting this population is not something that's worth your time, unless it's a situation where they're about to put themselves in harm's way by something that they're saying or thinking of doing. Otherwise, there's no point. One-to-one recreational interventions and interdisciplinary approach, which means we're working with other groups, not just recreation, such as nursing assistants, has been shown to reduce agitated behavior. Agitated behavior is very common in individuals with dementia. Now, some research having to do with autism. Okay, I don't like this one either because I don't agree. I mean, I'm sure it's true because there's research that's been done. They've done data. They've gone through all these steps. But it says although sensory stimulation has not been proven to be effective, it has also not been proven to be ineffective. So to me, it was just totally inconclusive and a waste of time. And I will tell you from experience, and that's what you get from me in regards from somebody who hasn't worked in the field, I have seen positive effects from sensory stimulation with individuals with autism. Period. It's true. It happens. Sorry. I mean, that's the research was done. How they did their research, I'm not sure. I have not seen this particular research, but I know that at least in short term, quality of life, it improves it and it's a positive. So remember that. Sensory stimulation. Now, if there's a test question asking about whether it's been proven to be effective through research, remember this slide. But after you take that test, remember what I told you in the fact that you can improve their day. Okay? Sensory stimulation can be used as positive reinforcement for simple bar pressing responses. Where you ask somebody yes or no. They may be nonverbal and they have like a button for yes and a button for no. And if they get something right, they get some sensory stimulation because that's something they like. You're giving them positive reinforcement for something good that they did. It has comparable motivation potential to food and social reinforcement. So basically, these people who need autistic individuals, and I just called them by their individuals who suffer from autism. I just called them their thing, and I don't like to do that, and I preach not to do that. Individuals with autism, they respond just as well as far as things they like. I want reinforcement for doing something good. Food, let me tell you, number one motivator for most people, especially like at NMRC, back there again, I know I spend a lot of time going back to that place, but I spent half of my life at that place, so you'll have to excuse me. We would do recreational activities, and we would have, say on a Monday night, we would do a recreational activity, and we would have 60 individuals show up for the activity. On Tuesday, we'd say, man, numbers were low last night. Let's pop some popcorn and maybe do some snow cones and add that to what we're doing tonight. We'd have 185 people show up on Tuesday. Now, part of that was because the staff who was bringing them, they wanted a snow cone and some popcorn, so they came on out and did their job that night. But food is a big, big motivator for people, okay? So remember that. Long story short, food, social reinforcement, like spending time with them, giving them, high five, good job, is food, social reinforcement, and the sensory stimuli that they enjoy and prefer, all are basically equal from what they've seen here as far as being motivating to these people. So that tells you how, to me, that just totally wipes out the top portion of this slide to me, okay, about the research. When you sit here and I tell you that, sensory stimulation as a reinforcer is as effective as food or social reinforcement, that tells me that it's effective, okay? If it wasn't effective, they wouldn't respond to it and they wouldn't want that, okay? Using touch pressure as sensory stimulation, now we're talking about autism, as a sensory stimulation intervention for youth with autism can have a calming effect. That goes right down to what remember me talking about the little cocoon thing that squeezes them? That's what we're talking about here. very, very calming for individuals with autism. That cocoon squeeze, they love that deep pressure feeling. I'd be trying to I would be biting through that thing if I was in it. That does not sound cool to me at all. I feel like I would think it was going to squeeze me to death. I'd be claustrophobic in it, probably hot. Like, I don't think I would enjoy being in that. But for them, it can be very calming, because instead of feeling all these other sensory things that they have going on, now they feel this steady, deep, like squeeze, calming, just pressure, like I've got you. That's it, and it takes all this other stuff kind of away. That's the reason that it's effective. Now, what can sensory stimulation do in regards to pain? Sensory stimulation using that snoozling room that we talked about resulted in less pain and disability, greater self-efficacy, so they're able to do more things on their own, and better sleep, because they've been stimulated enough that their brain has had to do some work, and it kind of makes them tired, which is going to make them sleep better. If that makes sense. I mean, that's the only explanation I have for that. And the, less pain and disability, it's a distraction. If you've got a hurt foot and, that's all you're thinking about, man, you're going to be limping like crazy. But if Jason came out from behind that corner and I was limping, like I bet you I'd haul tail out of here and I wouldn't have a limp in my foot. Just saying. Like you when you're distracted, you're going to forget about pain. So you're kind of being distracted by this sensory environment, which is going to lower that. Self-efficacy, by the fact that they're being able to choose the different areas in the room that interest them, that's one thing showing self-efficacy. They're being able to make choices. No matter how involved they may be, they're going to gravitate to what they want. They will become calmer. When you're in a calmer, more relaxed state, you're going to be more self-efficient. You're going to be more able to do things than when you're in like this agitated, confused state. So that's where it works out with that. There was a study that was done focused on acupuncture and massage, and it found no definitive effect of either on pain reduction. Kind of unrelated to what we're talking about, but somewhat related. Now, there's some research that had to do with mental and cognitive health issues. Now, they've done some studies, and this gets a little convoluted. A single subject, multiple baseline study with an institutionalized adult male with profound developmental disabilities. Okay, profound disabilities tells you that they are extremely low functioning. They need help with most daily living tasks, okay? When food is used as sensory reinforcer, hand mouthing can be effectively reduced for short periods of time. What do kids always do most of the time? We're talking about hand mouthing. What do they say? Man, they stick their hands in their mouth, their thumb, they suck their thumb. When you're talking about developmental disabilities, you're putting people who may be 40 years old, but they may have a 2-year-old mental state. You see a lot of this like hand mouthing, which is not appropriate for the age. It's gross. They're getting a lot of germs. They take their hands out and they're touching everything. I mean, there's not a lot of good about it. So anything you can do to reduce hand mouthing, short of, strapping gloves on their hands that have been dipped in apple cider vinegar or something. I mean, you know, handcuffing them to keep them from doing it. I mean, you got to be appropriate. Anything you can do that shows that it's going to cut this down is a positive. So food, they're putting something else in their mouth that's appropriate when it's being used as a sensory reinforcer, and that's going to be, you know, taste is what you're working with there. Now, while hand mouthing decreased, another thing that's usually positive, vocalization increased, which is their, you know, vocalization may not be talking. If we're talking about a single subject with profound developmental disabilities, it probably was a negative situation here, to be honest with you, because most vocalizations out of this population are not going to be meaningful. They're just going to be making noises and, you know, yelling out and things like that. And I'm not saying that in a bad way. It's not, you get used to it. It's not something that's scary or anything like that. That's just how they react. But obviously with the hand not in the mouth, they're going to be more prone to verbalize and vocalize. Long story short, it's better because you don't want them walking around with their hands in their mouth when they're a 30 or 40-year-old adult with developmental disabilities. For all the reasons I said, it's gross. It's not, you know, think about our environment these days. We're all walking around with masks and, you know, hand sanitizing our hands all the time. Do we want our clients with their hands in their mouth and taking them out in public places? Absolutely not. So you want to try to find ways to cut down on that. So how do we apply this to therapeutic recreation? There's something called a neurodevelopmental sequencing program, NDSP, and what it does, it addresses the behavioral, movement, and functional losses in individuals who are suffering from dementia. And it has it listed in different stages. Stage 1, the patients are able to make leisure decisions, but their understanding of leisure is limited to when and where leisure activities are available. They're still able to make some. Stage 2, patients can complete leisure activities with assistance. It may be hand over hand assistance. You know, like if they're playing bingo, you may have to really, you know, if they say B3, you may have to say right there, you know, and they'll place the thing, but they'd have to have a lot of kind of one-on-one interaction to make it work. Stage 3, now we're to the point where therapists use sensory stimulation to help the patient become aware of themselves and their environment. They're not as able at this point to do as much active participation. They're starting to lose their awareness to a degree. So your focus in the stage 3 is you're trying to help them become more aware of where they are, what's going on, what time it is, what time of year it is, what holidays are coming up, things like that, that keeps them with some sort of reference of normalcy of what's going on in the world around them, as much as you can. Again, they may forget it, but the more that you can put out there that reminds them of what's going on at that given time, the better. All right, let's look at this summary and see what I need to share here. Sensory integration attempts to rewire the brain through specific tiered activities. And when we say tiered activities, that's what we were talking about, how you kind of bring them in slowly, and people will adjust according to how much they can handle and how much works for them. Some people would thrive on a room where you had sound, you had bubbles, you had bubble tubes, you had drums they could hit on, you had a water bed they could lay on, you know, like all that stuff. It would be, they could handle it, and it would be very stimulating for them. And when they left out of there, they would feel better. They kind of had a chance for all their senses to be stimulated, and now they can kind of move on to something else. Most cases, you wouldn't want to just turn them loose into a room like that. It would be a total freak out. It would just be overload. Hell, it might be an overload for me if you put me in a room with all that. Just saying. Sensory stimulation needs to involve all the senses. This sensory bombardment or overload is not recommended. Like we said, that's just giving them too much. That's going to lead to, instead of positive outcomes, you're going to have negative outcomes and probably poor behavior because of it that you've kind of brought on yourself by putting them in that situation. Now remember what snoozling is. That's that multisensory environment controlled by the individual based on their preferences and needs. Again, they will gravitate to the things that they prefer. Take that into when you're doing your documentation, as we talked about documentation being important, you're going to document the things that they particularly like. Now, does that mean that that's all they're ever going to be exposed to? Not necessarily, but you can let them start out with that and then maybe say, all right, let's try this for a minute and try it. And if you get a negative reaction, you know what you need to do? Just pull it back and say, hey, here's the thing that you were liking. Let's go back to this. No need forcing it on them until they get pissed off and it becomes a negative situation. Now there's growing research body on sensory stimulation and dementia, autism, pain, and mental cognitive health issues. We went through all of those and covered them, okay? So, not so bad. We got done a little early. I'm going to stop the share here. Don't forget your paper that's due. What is it, the 15th? Is that what it was? I don't even know what today's date is. Hell, it may be the 15th. 13th? Okay, 2 days. Should be plenty of time. Get those in. It should be easy points. Be thoughtful on it when you're doing it. Now, there's a couple of you that, oh, Michael, I got your thing. I need to give back to you at the end. A couple of you I wanted to talk to after class. I think 3. Everybody else is free to go. Next class, we will cover the next chapter. And we're going to get these chapters done, and the final will be just like the last couple tests, okay? It's not going to be comprehensive. It's going to be from the last 7 chapters, just like these others have been. That's going to make it easier on you than worrying about a 21-chapter book for a final, okay? See y'all on Thursday. Have a good one. I think there was 3 I want to talk to. And I promise I'm not yelling at anybody or anything. Actually, I'll come back here with y'all. Take up my knob. You didn't get to look at it. You were one of them I want to talk to. Your goals are perfect. Okay. What we do on your objectives, what you do not do on your objectives, we follow that. The page, it has on our under the content, there's a page that has proper writing of objectives. And what I want you to realize is that you have 3 things in each of them to go back. And the first one is going to be your condition. Okay. And there's behavior and then there's criteria. There's 3 parts in each objective. Goals need to be short, 2 or 3 words. Perfect. That's perfect goals. Okay? For objectives, if you want to do what you want to do to make your objectives proper, three parts together, it made one perfect objective. The first, each one is going to start with something along the line of upon arrival to recreation therapy. That's what's going to start or when prompted by the recreation therapist. That's your condition. Okay, that's what starts the activity. Something has to prompt your patient to do it. Okay, when feeling stressed, when feeling overly stressed, that's what starts. Let me just go with one of your goals to make an example. Okay. He has here eliminate drug dependence. They'll all have the same thing. Okay, so we know who we're talking about. Eliminate drug dependence. So while you're going to do that, when prompted by the recreation therapist, would be your condition. Okay, that's the first part. Jennifer will participate in AA meetings. Okay, that's your behavior. That's what she's actually going to do. And then now we need a criteria. Twice a week for 1 month. That's something that you can check off and say whether or not she did it or not. You see what I'm saying? Or will attend AA meetings 80% of the time. That's measurable, and you can say whether or not did they do it or did they not. And that's how you're able to judge whether your objectives need to be tweaked, whether they're too hard, whether they're too easy. If she's making it 100% of the time, then maybe you need to make it a little harder. If she's only making it 30% and you're asking for 80%, maybe you're asking too much of it. So let's see. Let's look at one of yours. Increase social interaction. That's another great goal. You hear, see how short? All three of y'all had really good goals. They were short. 3 or 4 or 5 words are all we need. Now the objectives. When feeling stressed, you put a thing around that. That would be your condition. Okay. You see where I'm coming from? That's the first. That's what's going to start. When feeling stressed, Jennifer will keep a journal to express her thoughts and feelings related to her accident. That's her behavior. And share this information with her counselor 3 times per week. That's the condition. Did she show it to her 3 times a week, or did she not? Does that make sense to you guys? Do y'all see where I'm coming from?
We need to write them down.
Instead of like y'all gave me plenty of information, but you gave me a narrative thing where you're telling me what they're going to be doing, but there's a specific same thing. You gave me far enough information. It just needs to be written in a specific way because that's how it's put down in like charts. That's how they're looking for. They want you to have that condition. What's going to make them start it? What behavior are they going to do? And then how are we going to evaluate whether or not it's effective or not? And that's why you need like 80% of the time, 3 days a week, 30 minutes per session. Were they there 3 days a week, 30 minutes per session? You can say yes or no. And then you can evaluate whether or not it's working or not. So just remember those 3: condition, behavior, and criteria. Criteria is how well it's being done. Y'all do that? I just want that's something that I really wanted, and that I want you to really get this with the 388 because the goals and objectives need to be. The objective needs to be written in that form that I was just talking about. You know, when prompted by the therapist. Today we'll participate in aquatic therapy 30 minutes per session 3 days a week. That is an appropriate objective. And it's shorter and sweeter, and it's got the condition, the behavior, what she's gonna do, how many times, and how well. Makes sense? I just wanted it to be clear for you, especially since you're in the next class. Thank y'all. All right. Sorry to take the extra here early today to keep you a little long. Asia, if you have any more questions about that, let me know, because I want to make sure.
Okay.
And Sean, me and him went over it in my office the other day. He's got good. And he had what he was calling 3 objectives under his goals. And what it was the first objective was the condition. The second objective, he's calling it the objective, was the behavior, and the third was the criteria. He had a perfectly written objectives, but he had it broken up into 3 pieces, thinking that it was 3 different objectives. So, if you have questions, let me know about it. Yeah, I'll let you, boy, he swears he's got it, so. You gotta do something, man. Got here, I worked for some left there, and they disappeared for about a week. Just dragging his tail through the semester. We gonna get him.
This class will be on chapter 19. This class will be on chapter 19.
No, that was the one we just did. I think. This is gonna be videos today. Matter of fact, one of them was. Yep, you and Asia. And I was on 4 years up to him, you know, the one that I accidentally showed you in 372. I couldn't find it in time to put it on my list for today, but you know how to put it. It's
I
still.
saw your email, you tried to access, and I fixed it for you.
Yeah, I tried to, I think that was the proper one that I tried to access.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think I got enough to make it work today. My kids got a soccer game at 5:45, so we're gonna be out here about 5 for sure. And I'm not making you any promises, but what I hope, boy, I hate to even say this, never mind, I'll be quiet. Now, I'm not gonna make any promises, but what I hope to do is have class Thursday, and then we're gonna have kind of an interactive, hopefully kind of fun day on Tuesday. And then not have class on Thursday where y'all can focus on finishing up all your other stuff. Because we've about assessed ourselves out in this class. I mean, you know what I mean, and I'm not even giving y'all a final in here. This class is not, I do things different from a lot of folks, and I'm trying to do it my way as much as they'll let me. An assessment class is not a test class. Notice I didn't give no tests in here. It's not a good format for tests. I mean, some things I want y'all to take are like the fact that, you know, strengths-based assessments are a positive thing. You know, assessments happen not just at the beginning, they also happen throughout the whole process. You know, there's lots of different. I still got this dang thing recording. Golly.